go. And it is a fairly recent addition to the Texas Botanical Gardens and Native American Interpretive Center, our school class park. And he did a home run writing up the press information on this. I didn't give him a whole lot of information, but he understands the concepts here well, and I think he could be giving this presentation himself. So I'm happy to have him here at the Gardens. And I'm just super happy to have the Botanical Gardens here in Gulfway. Like I'm saying, it's such a neat thing that this place, which is such a cool place, is not in, San Angelo or Fort Worth or Uvalde or some place that I'm like, man, that'd be cool if I was ever there. It's right here in Gulfway where we live and we're regular parents. That's really cool.
Do you need somebody to do the slides?
Yeah, I guess I do. Yeah, sure. And actually, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. We're talking about the golden goats in Central Texas ecosystems, which is a bit of an odd thing because I spent the last decade and a half in Saskatchewan running goats, but we'll talk about that. Well, yeah, we'll advance to the next slide there. Yeah, there we go. I don't know how you can see those photos, but it's just a little taste tester of some of the work that we've done. We did a lot of brush mitigation work. This is the side that the goats are on, our electric fencing, and the side the goats have not been on yet. Those look the same before. Let's see, here's another example of that. We've got a windbreak, and then the goats have remodeled that windbreak on the right side. That was only about 2 days, actually. We're using rotational grazing with electric netting for a lot of our stuff. We did a hybrid system when we did windbreak grazing trials. That was part of my postdoc research at the University of Saskatchewan. Okay. So, what was my Saskatchewan experience? I was born and raised here in Gulfway, Eagle, and then went off to Tarleton, did an engineering physics degree, very much physics focused, electricity, magnetism sort of stuff a bit, although I didn't enjoy that, and thought that's where I wanted to be. And then went up to Saskatchewan for a wedding of all things, and got a research offer with the University of Saskatchewan, and it was biomedical engineering research. So basically taking what I knew from the engineering and physics world and applying it, trying to solve problems in biology and medicine. And over the course of a decade and a half, that morphed more and more into food production and agriculture, and that's really where I wanted to be. And then finally, in my postdoc, I got to do what I really wanted to do, which was go play with goats in the pasture and sweat out my eyeballs every day, put the fence up, and felt connected with my roots then, and was still doing research. That was really neat. But Saskatchewan gave us experience of a year where you see minus 60 Fahrenheit in the winter, 60, like that's just mind-boggling, right? And we survived it, we're still here. and yet the summer temperatures could go as high as 100 degrees. So in a year, you'd see 160 degree temperature swing. And I tell you, you learn things when the weather does that extreme of things, you learn things really fast. Or you just don't. Or you're just done for, right? So it was good in the sense that it really taught us a lot about things that might have a Texas application, like seasonal dormancies. You can ignore seasonal dormancy here to your, to your harm, but you can't there. You just cannot ignore it, right? So we had 6-month-long winters. Taught us a lot about growth and regrowth patterns, because I tell you, in the spring when the snow is gone, that growth happens like this. And if you make the wrong move early in the grazing season, you really see it in a very pronounced way. So that was a useful experience. Teaching us about growth and regrowth patterns, teaching us about maximizing forage growth. We only had a 3 to 5 month grazing period. If you were really good, you might get 5 to 7 months. If you did things like swamp grazing and bale grazing, you could count the longer grazing season. But even that, there was really serious challenges. So the forward-thinking producers up there, I mean, they really had their thinking caps on, and they had a whole lot of different variables to manage, and it just gave me a different perspective, a different respect for the people that are doing things that look impossible in those climates, and yet they're doing them fairly successfully on a regular basis. We had dairy goats. Dairy goats taught us a lot about goat production factors, because you do something wrong one day, you see it in the milk pail the next day, right? It's a feedback loop. I never got them when we were meat goats, and as soon as we got into fairly high production dairy goats, the feedback was very quick. So again, it taught us things, taught us lessons very quickly, allowed us to see patterns in a clear, recognizable way, whereas usually it's more nuanced and harder to tease out what effect given attributes is had. We have very heavy predator presence. We have a mix of forest, prairie, cropland, hills, valleys, and flatland. If you know Saskatchewan, you know flatland. Okay, this is north of Montana, by the way. You don't know Montana, right? You know Montana because it's on the calendars with all the beautiful mountains. Not that part of Montana. The flat part that doesn't make it on the calendars, right? It looks like Kansas. It looks like Nebraska. That's the Great Plains, right? Great Plains go from here in Texas all the way north to Saskatchewan, and the southern third of Saskatchewan is the Great Plains, and then it runs into Boreal Forest. Bottom quarter, and then it runs into Boreal Forest. But pretty much everyone that lives in Saskatchewan lives in the Great Plains, prairie region, maybe curves. But we happen to be in this little range of hills called the Thickwood Hills, which was really neat because we had a really diverse set of ecosystems, land variations, and we ran goats there, and we also ran goats in the more traditional flatland cropland of Saskatchewan. So that taught us a lot about fencing systems. There's a lot of lessons we took from there that are relevant to savanna management and pasture establishment here in Texas. And so hopefully I can present some of that information to you all, but we also looked at livestock integration in cropland. Essentially, my postdoc research was how do we integrate livestock as a tool to manage inbreaks in crop fields. I won't get a chance to talk about that a whole lot here, but certainly inform this presentation to be a couple references to it. Another way to put that is agri-silviculture or agroforestry management, meaning you intentionally put woody growth into cropland. How do you manage that now? Ends up being very complex, not necessarily complicated but complex, because every part of that affects the other parts of it, right? And I found that really satisfying. We looked at layering production, in other words, running, for instance, goats and chickens and a garden crop on the same piece of land in succession. A lot of this is heavily relying on rotational grazing because it gives us a lot of levers to pull how to change the operation up to meet our aims and goals. And then some stuff like passive solar venting infrastructure. We were using passive solar heating for our uniforms for animals. Spent a little bit into architecture stuff, a little bit into energy efficiency design, and a lot of composting, which applies to carbon cycling. So those really inform a lot of the stuff in this presentation. Microclimate leveraging. In other words, how do we create a different climate in a small part of our property so that different activities happen there, okay? Different processes can take place that will hopefully impact a larger part of our production. Carbon and nitrogen capture, which is why goats, I'm presenting today's presentation at least as why goats have such an important role. It is carbon and nitrogen capture and microbial activity within a microbiome. Okay. And I'm going to go off the time. I'm trying to speak to it. So what's our aim? Well, our aim is probably a good operation, right? Regardless of what your operation is. If you're in, let's say you're in the hunting business, okay, what's a good operation? Hunters are happy, there's a healthy population of deer, it's a nice hunting area to be in. If you're exclusively a goat farmer, what does a good operation look like? Well, to me, that good operation would be a healthy herd that's going to produce healthy offspring. We got good genetics, so it's going to be a healthy herd for a long time to come. And, you know, not be one of those families where the kids are like, oh, I hate goats, man. I wish I lived in the city. Be one that the kids are like, I want to have some goats of my own, and I want to go with you, Daddy, to help you. That's part of what makes a good operation for me, okay? And it's financially, it's pulling its weight. It may not be our whole income, but it does put food on the table, if you will. Okay, so there's a financial impact. And an operation where I'm happy to be out on my land. It's a pleasant place to be. Aesthetically, I know there's a good heritage there. I know things are going well. It's a prosperous operation. So that's more than just what the accountant looks at, of course. That's more than just what an ecologist looks at. That's the sort of operation that would make grandma proud, right? Because it's paying the bills and it's looking after the next generation of people. You got neighbors that you get along with. The local economy is benefiting from it. You're not being a good operation in one area at the expense of other areas that will affect your quality of life. So I talk about quality of life. This is not my term. This is an Alan Savory term. He basically says if you're analyzing an operation, trying to figure out what your aims are, it can't be just come back to the pocketbook. It can't just come back to some ecological indicator. It can't just come back to soil health. Basically, it all has to come back to quality of life. And everybody's quality of life will be defined a little bit differently, but quality of life is made up of a lot of different things. And once we understand what makes up a good quality of life or a good operation, then we have to figure out what our short-term aims are to get us closer to that ideal operation, and what levers we have, what adjustments we can make to our operation to get us aimed in the right direction, And we need those levers, and we need some way to make adjustments to our operation and get feedback on whether that's moving us in the right direction. Okay. So that's kind of background, and that's really, I hope sets the stage for the perspective that we need to take when we're looking at our operations. Okay? And I will, at the very last slide, has recommended reading on it, recommended books. It's got Alan Savory's book there. If you want to take a picture of that slide, please feel free to. He talks about holistic context, meaning looking at the big picture of your life and your operation and your community and figuring out what your aims are, yours. He doesn't tell you what they are, okay? He helps coach you through what are the aims and then what are the things that I need to do on the ground to meet those aims to move the operation in the right direction. Very powerful. His holistic context is a very powerful exercise to go through. And basically, it leaves you with a guide to making life decisions later on. You know, I think we've all experienced where you get into a rut and you're really focused on, I really want to get some contributes going on my property, or I really want to get more serious about gardening this year. And sometimes in hindsight, 5 years later, you realize you were a bit out of balance. Yeah, it was a good aim to have, but you shelved a whole lot of other things, and you made sacrifices that you didn't realize you were making in other areas. And to have that holistic context that you can pull out and remind yourself, this is the overall aim of the operation, is really useful when you're making decisions. And sometimes you turn a 3-day decision into a 15-minute decision. Because you struggle with this for 3 days, trying to figure out where it fits into your operation. You pull that sheet out that you filled out. This is your aim, this is your operation, this is your resource base that you're working with. And the decision becomes clear in 15 minutes. And I don't know about y'all, but decision-making fatigue is the biggest fatigue probably in my life. You know, I go out and call a walk, it's easy enough or anything, but trying to make complex decisions when you've got a lot of factors at play is challenging, and fatiguing, and can really wear you down. So anything that helps you in that direction is great. So the rest of the presentation is basically 3 areas. First, the role of goats. We've got to talk about browsers versus grazers. To me, what makes a goat is that it's a browser. It's not a grazer, it's a browser. We'll talk about that. Nothing is perfectly a grazer, perfectly a browser. Everything is a mix, but they are predominantly browsers. And why that makes a goat a goat. We'll spend quite a bit of time on this middle one. Bear with me, okay? Carbon cycle in a brittle climate. How many people understand that phrase already? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, probably a few Alan Savory readers. Okay, we'll go through that. I'm going to put it in terms that my 9-year-old daughter can understand. Okay, it's not an academic presentation. And then lastly, we'll look at rotational grazing. Just a very short session on rotational grazing because it makes the rest of it possible. Browsers versus grazers. I could have named this "Why Goats Eat Everything," including tin cans and your grandma's laundry and fender off your car, parking in the wrong place. Or I could have named it "Why Goats Ain't Sheep," because a lot of times we treat goats as sheep. They're both small ruminants. Matter of fact, you'll hear that phrase, small ruminants, thrown out a lot. It's not the sheep and goat together. There's an important distinction. It's important in their diet, and it's important in their activity, and where they need to be, and what they will do to relay it in the long term, how successful and productive they will be, all ties into that distinction. If you haven't heard of sheep, and you go out in the field, and you take a picture of them, you come back the next day, you take another picture, you come back the next day, you take another picture. While they're out grazing, take 100 pictures, and you look back at all of them. Most of the time, you'll see 9 of them with their heads down and 1 with their head up. What I mean by that is 9 of them are eating grass at the moment, and 1 of them is eating a bush at the moment. Not because it's different than the rest. Because about 90% of their diet is grasses, forbs, things that grow low to the ground, herbaceous origin, and about 10% of it is woody. You go out to goats, do the same thing. You find about 6 of them have their heads up. They're eating off trees, bushes, take woody growth, and about 4 of them have their heads down. They're eating off the ground. Actually, they won't be eating right off the ground. They'll be eating the highest grass available from top down. There's a really neat quote here by Pat Colby. This is another book that will be on the recommended reading list. If you want to take a picture of it again, you're welcome to. Natural Goat Hair. Pat Colby, she's out of Australia, did some research in Britain. Very knowledgeable on what makes a goat a goat, essentially. And she has this really neat anecdote here. I'll just summarize it. They was in Australia. They were doing some research trying to establish what changes should be made to a sheep mineral diet or supplementation to make it more suitable for goats. And the first thing they needed to do was, well, what essentially they were trying to do is how much copper, for instance, or how much zinc, or how much magnesium, what have you. In this case, it's copper. How much copper does a goat really need? And there's been a lot of research done on sheep. If you know Britain, you know, they did a lot of research at the time, and it's sheep country. It's not really goat country. It's almost rainforest. Wales, where my wife is from, is very, very rainy. It's considered rainforest. But so essentially the research that they had was very good for sheep, but not very good for goats. And so the first thing they did is they said, well, we need to establish a lethal dose of copper for a goat. So give them a dose that would kill a sheep. You know how much that is. See what happens. If it happens, give them twice that dose. See what happens. Now, if it happens, give them 3 times that dose. I think they were up to like 5 times the lethal dose of a sheep. And to put it in her terms, then waited for it to die. A few weeks later, the goat had never looked better and flatly refused to even be ill. They needed way more mineral than sheep. I'm not talking 20% more. Way more. Like, we're talking like 5 times as much, okay? Enough copper that would kill 5 sheep. And the goats would do good. This is the big difference. This is why goats eat everything, including tin cans. This is why they want you to grab his clothespins off the laundry line. This is why you might see them licking on rocks or eating dirt sometimes even, or eating some weird plant. Story time here. We had this, one of our first goats that we ever bought as a couple, my wife and I, was an old sated milking. And we got an old sated milking goat so she could teach us how to milk. Right? She knew the ropes. She knew how this stuff worked. And she was a very nice, producing, old ornery mama. She wasn't ornery unless she needed to be, but she knew better be ornery than had to be. And we had her in summer, one summer, and then we had her in the winter for us through the winter. And we were milking her. She was giving good production, ready to have kids in the spring. By the way, she used to give us 4 kids. 11 years old, still rocking quads. About everything. Just a real wonderful, wonderful mom. And made us fall in love with goats. Anyway, in the spring though, sometimes we'd go for a walk up the road and we'd say, oh, why don't we bring Jail? It was Jail after the woman in the Bible that had the 10 peg. She had horns. It looked like she was really ready to do it too. Anyway, why don't we bring Jail along? So we put her on a leash. She was used to being tethered. Take her for a walk with us. And she did not want to walk. There was a driveway lead that she would die into. Called prostrate knot. We didn't know it at the time. We just knew it as porch like out. A lot of people call it, and it'd grow on the edge of the road. It'd grow right in the middle of the road. And it was like it was sort of a succulent looking plant, but it was really tough. You'd drive over with a car and keep growing. And it had these little brownish leaves, and it had, they call it knotweed because it had these little sections. It looked almost like bamboo sections, you know, with a knot and then a growth section and a mellow and another growth section. And they call it prostrate because it grows close to the ground. Prostrate is laying down, prostrate knotweed. And well, I just figured this out because I was just so curious. Why on earth is she going for this thing? It must be, is it like a high protein thing? Is it carbohydrate? What's she missing from her diet that makes her go crazy for this stuff? Or is it something like a low weed? I don't know. You know, I was just really curious about this thing. And so I'm doing some research. I figure out it's prostrate knotweed, trying to figure out anything about it. It's not really in the foraging guides. There's not much information about it because it's not an important species, you know. It's just not something you raise livestock. What's going on here? Anyway, my wife is a real animal lover. I hope you don't mind me saying something. But she's a real animal lover, and she's looking at the goat. She's not worried about it eating the knotweed. She's looking at its health, and it's an older goat, so we do have people control styles on its body condition and stuff, especially since it's hot production. We're talking quads every year. And she noticed the nose is pretty bare on it, not a whole lot of hair growing, and her hair is just really brittle, you know, and it would break off If you petted her backwards, you'd end up with a handful of hair. And I didn't know what it was, but you know, I've got pretty funny symptoms too after 6 months of winter, so I didn't put a whole lot of stock in it, so I would get them out on frustration and it's better. But I was really interested in this prospect company. So I looked it up, and I was at the University of Saskatchewan at the time. I had access to the whole university library, which has research papers all over the world you can pull up on. Very good searchable index for them. And I don't know how many papers I've been through, and I was in some old scanned copy of some from like 1920, I don't know. And you know, the old typewriter font. At the very end of it, you know, it says a few things about it. At the very end of it, it just says zinc accumulator. I guess the only thing I found about it so far is got lots of zinc in it. Maybe she's missing zinc. No. Goes from you on mineral. And I was coming to tell Zara this, and she says to me, I think it's either a copper or a zinc deficiency that's breaking her hair off. And I just went, no way. She's zinc deficient, and she has found a weed on our property that's good for nothing but accumulating zinc. And she'll run you over to get to it. And she's just scarfing the stuff now. And that was a real aha moment for me. I just got goosebumps now. Goats' behavior is driven by their mineral needs. Are they breaking out your fence? You got beautiful grass in there? Probably because they want to eat your neighbor's trees. Or some weird exotic plant that happens to have some mineral you don't even know goes in. Okay? This explains a lot of goat behavior. It explains the habitats that goats are in. Because they're looking for mineral, they're more likely to eat woody vegetation with deep roots in mineral soil that are bringing up mineral from down deep and storing that mineral in places that can be digested by a goat, like twig ends, leaves, seed pods, bark. Goats demark trees, right? Oh, found a surprise peach tree, and the goat got out and ring barked it. It's dead now. Dang those goats. Here's the explanation. They're looking for a mineral. Mineral-driven foraging defines goats' behavior. It might be a little bit of an overstatement, but not much of it. Okay? It really does drive their behavior. Okay, yeah, I'm probably 3 slides ahead of myself here, sorry. Here's a picture of some of our goats. They're in belly deep, beautiful grazing. It's just coming mature. It's good grass. And where are all their heads? Up in the trees. Right? There's 4 of them there. I didn't take that picture because they were all browsing. These are a mix of goats, by the way. That buck there on the right is Spanish mix. But some of the other ones are dairy mixes. But this is true of goats. This is a bunch of sticks that we were throwing into the goat's pen over the winter. In the spring, when all the snow melted, you kind of see the winter's collection of sticks. You see how bare they are? Some of these are aspen or poplar, some of them are pea bush. They're stripping the bark off of all of them. And actually, go to the next slide. They're doing this right next to their hay feeder. If we want to give them a treat, we go break a bunch of branches off the hedgerow bushes and we throw them in there. And this is supposed to be a video. I'm sorry to transfer off into USB. There's some cute little babies there that are all nibbling on the branches and the leaves right next to the hay feeder. They really lie. But right, when we were moving them between pens, so now that you have them outside the pens, you have a good way to draw them. We pull a branch down, drag them behind us. I said one of the kids up front, you drag that branch, if you don't follow, you give them a taste of it, and then you start walking. Here come the whole herd behind. Here's a solid example of how much they need mineral. Selenium deficiency, which is important for reproduction, all aspects of reproduction. They looked at herds that were selenium deficient, and then they compared them to herds that were selenium sufficient. They had enough selenium. And all sorts of things went wrong with the selenium deficient herd, and you'll hear some of these in isolation. 33% reduction in infant consumption rates. Breeding didn't take for a third of the herd compared to the one that had plenty of selenium. But then even the ones that didn't get pregnant, they had high rates of miscarriages, stillbirths, and abortions. And then the babies were born with poor stockholm reflex, poor muscle strength. They're just weak babies all around. And the mother's production was down by a quarter. 23% reduction in milk yield because of selenium deficiency. And they also had more retained placentas, high rates of retained placentas. So all of these combine to a producer's bottom dollar by reducing 50% your kid crop deficit. At weaning time, plenty of deficient herds had 50% less kids for weaning than they did plenty of sufficient herds. Huge impact, right? And so one of the reasons that goes through so well here is because our soil is got the right mineral mix. And who's got war goats? Who knows what war goats are? Who's been around war goats? Come on. Y'all know what war goats are? You have been around war goats? Raise your hand. Yeah, come on. Yeah, of course we have. They're everywhere around here, right? We live on County Road 517. There's a big sign there, home of Mojo. Full-blood South African boar Billy, right? And you go down there and talk to the neighbors and say, yeah, this is the house that Mojo built. It was one of the first South African full-blood boar Billy imports after the mohair collapse. When the mohair collapse, right across the street here is still the mohair building, and when mohair subsidies were removed from the American system, then everybody had to convert to something other than boar goats, and boar goats were a good choice. Spanish goats were a good choice. Everybody was upgrading Spanish goats with boar genetics. Where did the boar goats come from? South Africa. Guess what South Africa's like? It's like Central Texas. Nearly identical semi-arid climates, rocky topographies, aggressive woody brush vegetation. Aggressive woody brush vegetation. Next slide, please. Where else? Oh, sorry, yeah. The boar goat was easily exported from its native South American valley directly to West Central Texas because of the environmental overlap. Next slide. And where else? The Mediterranean Basin. If you do any Bible history, you find goats all through ancient Middle East, Near East lands, all the way around the Mediterranean Basin, really. Why? Again, intense summer droughts, mountainous rocky terrain, and a thick coverage of woody, aromatic brush. These are the environments that goats thrive in. We got it right here in Central Texas, okay? If you want to pull some interesting goat herding, goat keeping advice, husbandry advice, you can pull it at Genesis. Jacob's keeping his father-in-law's flock, Laban's flock, on almost the identical land that we're keeping it on here. And by the way, those of you that are familiar with the Genesis account of Jacob keeping Laban's flock, remember this almost superstitious thing about him peeling rods, and then he puts the rods in the water troughs, and the flocks are drinking from them. This is selenium. He's giving the flocks selenium. It's in the bark of the poplar rods. By the way, the rods that you saw in their pen, that they had peeled all the bark off, the big ones were poplar. Isn't that crazy? I could go out with a potato peeler or a pocket knife, they just about take the pocket knife out of my hand while I was trying to take the bark off those logs. They love it. And they had mineral supplements. I think we had 5 different mineral supplements for them. And they still just about take the knife out of your hand trying to get the bark before you can cut it off. Okay? But he didn't have time with a potato peeler to hand feed his herd, so you strip a few pieces off and throw it in the water, the wood swells, the bark strips off, and the sheep can access it themselves. And he does it specifically at breeding time. It says conception time, I think. It's breeding time. Why? He's setting the flock up for double the weaning rates. The herd is really going to benefit a lot from that mineral injection. Now, we kind of can't speak for everyone here, but probably most of us have gotten a little bit lazy about mineral because we go to Tractor Supply and just grab a mineral block and forget about it, right? But it still defines what makes it different. Some other examples, parasites that are able to survive on zinc-deficient hosts, meaning if your goats are zinc-deficient, you're going to have trouble keeping parasites under control. Cobalt deficiency does too. Low-protein diets do too. Copper, administered as a bolus, has been shown to reduce worm infections in ruminants. So copper, very important for goats. We tend to bolus goats, certainly dairy goats, with copper. And a bolus sits in their stomach and slowly administers copper over about 6 months. Another thing about parasites, and this is very relevant to goats being browsers instead of grazers. 80% of parasite larvae live in the first 2 inches of vegetation. Okay? Let's say this is your patch floor. There's 2 inches right there. Okay? That's where all your worm larvae are sitting, in that bottom 2 inches. They're sitting there because they dry out if they get higher. They spend too much energy climbing up if they go higher. So 80% of them are sitting that close to the ground. Your sheep are going to eat them, aren't they? Your goats are not unless they have to. because they like to eat with their heads up. Not just in terms of eating brush, but also that grass. They start from the top and they eat their way down. Now, if you don't let your livestock graze closer than 4 inches from the ground, they're just not picking the larvae up. Right? So this grazing impulse or behavior on the part of goats saves them from parasite infections. And it's no wonder why, when we put goats, manage goats like sheep, we have parasite problems to skyrocket. You get one overgrazed land, they're down close to the ground, they're eating that bottom 2 inches of vegetation, their body's not designed to deal with that kind of parasite load coming in. They need to be grazing higher than that. And again, rotational grazing and proper stock grazing, of course, too, help us provide that scenario where they're eating from the top down as they have to move here out. And then actually in a bedroom grazer scenario where they're rotational grazing through shelter. Here's a picture we took right out of our yard. We had 8 goats. I don't know, the paddock was probably as big as this pad, maybe 3/4 as big as this pad. It's probably better than most, pretty small paddock. And this is a before picture, not we put them in, maybe a day that you put them in. This is 2 days later. 8 goats, 2 days later. See the browse line there? This is how high they can reach. And also, see the barn? They've taken the barn apart, a lot of these. Now, because we're rotational grazing, I go out every day and I'm checking, is it where we want to be? Okay. Have they grazed too low? Have they made too much impact on that brush? This Carolina hedge hadn't been touched really by grazers or browsers in, I don't know, 20 years, maybe more than that, maybe 30. We wanted to hit that hard, and we wanted to remodel it so that it didn't have all these branches way down on the ground. It grew more like a tree or like a nice shrub, like that shrub right there. All right, see how it's kind of a V shape with an arch top? It don't have a whole bunch of brush hanging down on the ground, right? And we were able to remodel. And by the way, this gave rise to that postdoc research project. This picture right here, basically. We were trying to retrain hedgerows to grow like that bush is instead of in a full half circle. Can you hold up your hand? That's what the cross section of those things look like before the goats got to it. All the way to the ground on both sides. Okay, half an inch. All right. Okay. Move to the next section. Carbon cycle and brittle climate. Stay with me. Stay with me. Put ranching terms. What's a brittle climate? First thing we're going to talk about. What is this brittle climate we're talking about? And stay with me because I'm going to tell you the secret for turning brush and weeds into black soil barbecue. That's a win-win, isn't it? Okay. First off, we're going to talk about what's a brittle climate. A brittle climate means that if you have plant matter, it don't matter whether it's a wooden fence post or last year's growth of weeds or grasses that's sitting there, what happens to it? How does it go away? What's the end of this life cycle, existence cycle? What does it stop being vegetation? Well, in some climates, in brittle climates, it goes away by weathering or oxidation. Oxidation means it reacts with oxygen molecules, forms some other molecule, and leaves the mass. Okay? The other option, which is in a non-brittle climate, is biological decomposition. Microbes, nematodes, earthworms, whatever, mushroom. The mushroom is just a fruit form, but the rest of the mushroom organism, okay, is breaking down that fence posts, grass, branches, whatever, okay, whatever's left over after the plant's life. Those two things define what a brittle climate is. Brittle climate is when we're weathering and oxidation, breaks things down, and a non-brittle, like called soggy. A soggy climate is where biological decomposition does the work. To put it in ranching terms, if you're in a brittle climate, your old fence posts are skinny, and if you're in a non-brittle climate, a soggy climate, your old fence posts are soggy. Okay? When you replace your fence, or you pull a soggy fence post out, or you pull the skinny fence post out. Anybody got loose wire on the fence post? And we wrap a piece of wire around it, and 20 years later, the wire's loose. It's because the fence post is shrunk. It's a smaller diameter than it was before. Mills County, by the way, this brittleness scale is from Alan Savory. Again, first book, and the recommended reading list at the end. Alan Savory's listed management, sorry. In Mills County, he puts out a 6 or a 7 out of 10 for brittleness. 10 being very brittle, 1 being not very brittle. But he doesn't account for temperatures. Okay? He's looking at rainfall and moisture events, how much dew, how much humidity there is. He's not looking at how fast things dry out after the rain falls. So my point there is, it's probably way more than a 6 or 7. Okay, once you have that temperature in, we'll probably have closer to 7, 8, 8.5, maybe even. So we're very brittle climate. My wife comes from a non-brittle climate. Hey, soggy Wales. It is very soggy. And this is a tree that they trimmed back several times, and then they finally just took everything off of it. And it's dead. It's supposed to look like a stump, but it don't, does it? It's like little hills of moss. Because it's covered completely in moss. You see the mushrooms popping out? That's because there's a very happy, mature, fungal community that's developed through that stump, and it's breaking it down. It's pulling excess nutrient or leftover energy out of that stump, and it's converting it into its own. Here's another example of that. This wood is just rotting down. It's got moss growing all over it. You got there's more mushrooms there. I didn't take pictures of these because the mushrooms they just sent me the pictures that I have. And it's so prolific. This is biological decomposition. Life, some of the life is breaking down that whole plant material. Then you know what this is? It's a big fence, right? It's made out of stone. That biological decomposition is so effective. They're making fences, picket fences out of stone, out of slate. Okay? Why is it that way? The conditions are right for microbial activity. It stays moist, relatively stable temperature. They love that. Okay? This is what microbes need to survive and thrive. Now, you put them in West Texas sand, ain't nobody mushroom picking in West Texas, is it? It's just not enough microbial activity, and that's because it's a very brittle climate. Okay, so compare this to a brittle climate, and I'm going to compare it to here. This is at our ranch between here and Mullen, and you see all our fence posts. I had to find all the fence posts on the property. See how skinny this one's getting? That's not because the chipmunks went chewing away. That's oxidation. Weathering. The fence posts are weathering away. There's a piece of wood sitting on the ground. It's weathering away too, and that's because we're in a brittle climate. So to understand this, we got to talk about carbon. Well, why does brittle versus non-brittle make such a difference to how goats play a role in this digestive system? We got to talk about carbon now. Again, stay with me. Let's get through this. What's carbon? Well, effectively, it's the difference between black soil and desert sand. Go down and buy party soil. Go down and buy a playground sand, play sand for your grandkids, kiddos. The difference is carbon. Body soil has got loads of soil organic carbon in it. Sand does not. There might be other differences, but the number one difference is soil organic carbon in that. Okay. It is also, let's skip this first. See that? Yeah. Soil carbon determines, it is the basic building block for all known life on Earth. If you want life, you've got to start with carbon atoms. Okay? Soil carbon determines a farm's fertility, water resilience, and biological life. Because it's the basic building block for life. It's going to determine whether your farm is fertile, able to grow lots of things. It's going to bond with a weak chemical bond to water. I think a carbon atom can bond to 12 water atoms. Any chemist in here? Maybe a chemist can correct me if questions have. Then a weak electrostatic bond to 12 water atoms. This is why potting soil holds water so well. And it doesn't hold it like clay does. It doesn't rot your roots out. Because that carbon is a weak bond. It's a chemical bond to water. It's not like a clay seal. It's holding back. So your soil's not saturated and with water. There's air in the soil structure. That's carbon. That's what carbon's doing. That's why we include water resilience or drought resilience when we got high carbon soils. And determines biological life. And a lot of times what we're talking about here is microbiological life. Stuff you can see under a microscope. Put your dirt under a microscope. We can see some of it under a microscope. You can see the beetles and weevils and mites and earthworms and stuff like that. That activity. But you get it under a microscope and you see a whole lot more. Another book I'll put in a plug for, it's not mine. John Steeker writes a book. It's called The Soil Owner's Manual. Again, it's on the last slide. The Soil Owner's Manual. The title, the cover photo, excuse me, is a picture of a pasture, just a pin line drawing. 2 cows on top of it. Okay. It's talking about 2 cows an acre. Stock season. And then underneath the grass, it's got no roots in the grass, I believe. And then it's got two cows' mirror images on the bottom. And the cows are made up of all sorts of things you can see under the microscope, microbes. Now, why's he got that on the cover of your book? He's got that on the cover of the book because he wants you to understand if you're running 2,000 pounds of livestock on top of the ground, say on an acre, 2 acres, however many acres you got that would sustain 2,000 pounds of livestock, guess what the weight of the soil microbial community is on that same 2 acres? It's 2,000 pounds as well. If you got 2,000 pounds of livestock on the top, and you're running a sustainable system, meaning next year you can still get that much weight on it, next year you've got the stock and it's right. You will have the same weight in microbes under the soil on that same land. That's how important they are for converting old vegetative matter into next year's fertility. They're soil builders. Microbes are soil builders. And the reason they're soil builders is because they play an important step in the carbon cycle, getting that carbon back into the soil and the soil again. That's how farming was built. And when I'm talking about climate change here, you hear about carbon law climate change. Okay? I'm worried about how we increase production on the land. And it does have to help out climate change if you're interested in that. But my real interest is looking after the land the right way. And putting carbon, we're going to talk about here, is putting carbon to work, improving soil's production potential. Because that's the difference in good soil and bad soil. How do we get that carbon into the soil working for us? In the root zone, by the way, of the soil. Not down a mine shaft like some of these sci-tech newspaper articles are talking about. It's ridiculous. Running carbon down a mine shaft. It's just ridiculous because it's the best thing you can do for your topsoil. Why on earth would we put it in the topsoil via natural processes to improve the farm's production potential and drought resilience and how pleasant the land is to be on, and temperature mitigation, and soil microbial communities, and all sorts of things that it'll benefit if you get it in the topsoil. Go ahead. Okay, let's ask the question again. What's carbon? The other answer I could have given, it's air. You guys know, everybody get into junior high, right? Junior high science. You breathe in oxygen, you breathe out. It's carbon, isn't it? Carbon dioxide. When you breathe in oxygen, you're breathing out oxygen with the carbon stuff to it, right? That's that carbon going out of you into the air. And what do plants do? They're breathing in carbon dioxide, and they're breathing out oxygen. That's why they're good for us. You know, if you watch these movies where they go to the moon or Mars or wherever, you know, they're trying to make a go of it, they have to have the plants in there and give them oxygen. Okay. Here's the part you really got to stick with me. What's happening to your fence posts? It's the same thing that's happening to your dead trees, the same thing that's happening to your dead grasses. It's the end of the cycle for all your vegetative growth, any plant tissue. What's happening to it? Well, the cellulose, that's the tissue that plants are made out of, is made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Okay? Nitrogen's probably pulled out by the time. Mostly it's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We know hydrogen and oxygen are in there, right? H2O is water. Carbon is basically a block of life. It's definitely in there. Right? It's plant tissue is made of those three things. The problem with carbon, good and bad actually, any exposed carbon atom, so if it's on the outside of that tree trunk, okay, it's on the very outside, it's exposed to the air, you get it just a little ways in, it's not exposed to the air anymore. So just on the outside, it's exposed to the air, an oxygen molecule comes past, and that carbon, which was coupled up with something else in the wood, says, oh, I like that one a little better. And it couples up with that oxygen. Okay? It's no longer a solid when it does that. It's carbon dioxide. This is crazy. You're talking about a piece of a solid fence post or a piece of grass that's dead turning into air? To thin air? Yes, that's what happens. Okay? The outside of your fence post oxidizes. We know oxidizes. I'm talking about trailers going rusty. That's iron oxide. Okay? It's iron attaching to oxygen. Lots of things oxidize. That's why we have gas. That's why we have combustion engines. That's why we have explosions. Because things are really reacting with oxygen. The last thing you want to do is have an oxygen bottle in a house fire, right? Because it's going to really fuel that fire hot. You got oxyacetylene quartz, oxygen and acetylene. It's the oxidizer, right? You put oxygen into a reaction, it does things. Here, it couples up with carbon. The carbon goes from being a solid to being a gas, and it blows away. It's in the air now. So pieces of your fence post from 20 years ago are floating around the world now. And I know it's crazy. Stick with me. Okay? So if you look at an old fence post, you'll find that the splinters and the corners are kind of gone now. They're kind of rounded over. And that's because that carbon is exposed to more air on a sharp point than it is elsewhere. But also you'll see that the cracks widen in that fence post. That's because air is moving into those little bitty cracks, and the surface on both sides of that crack is oxidizing, and that carbon's going away. So that crack eventually gets wider and wider. You can see this, just walk real fast. Okay. Unless you got brand new metal fences, you got to find, you have to come to our pasture. Or you look at a dead tree, or dead grasses if you didn't last that long. So compare that to a soggy climate. What's happening to these any plant matter? It's not just trees. Okay? It's easy to see the tree. Any plant matter. Microbes are digesting it straight back in the soil. That carbon that the plant pulled out of the air, you notice by the way, right? The plants pulling that carbon is getting transferred straight into the soil by the microbial community, because the climate provides you with the right atmosphere for metabolism from microbes to happen, right? Go ahead. Yeah, we know this. We know this part. Animals are breathing in oxygen, they're breathing out carbon dioxide. Your science teacher, Mrs. York, showed me this in junior high here in Gold Lake. Okay. CO2 is breathed out, the plants bring in the CO2 and they breathe out oxygen. What are they keeping? The carbon, right? Go ahead. Yeah, the carbon is going to make up the plant matter. It uses that to form a chain of atoms into a molecule that's cellulose structure. Okay? Now the question for us is, does that carbon end up in our soil? The plants are capturing for us when they photosynthesize. Is it ending up in our soil to improve our topsoil? This is how plants build topsoil. Is it ending up in our topsoil? It is if you're in a non-brittle climate. We're not in a non-brittle climate, we're in a brittle climate. This is a big question. It's not happening here. Ours is flying away. There's no soil carbon being made. There's air being made, right? I've got to introduce the other analogy. Brittle versus non-brittle climate. You mow your lawn. You're bagging, okay? You're putting the grass clippings in a trash bag, you tie it up really tight, it's open curve. You run out of trash bags. Almost done with the yard anyway. Okay, I'll just blow everything over here to the edge of the yard. And you blow all your grass clippings over to the edge of the yard and just leave. You come back 2 days later, you're not so hot. Okay. Come back 2 days later to deal with it. What are your grass clippings by the fence look like? You pick them up, crunch them, it's a nice salad. You couldn't eat that, could you? No way. You get splinters in your mouth or something. Maybe not quite splinters, but it's crispy, right? Okay, now you go over to deal with the bag. And you drag one of them bags open and it rips open. Ooh. Steam, carbon dioxide. You know what carbon dioxide smells like, not much. It's like, ooh, man, I just got knocked you out. And that bag rips open, right? And you reach in there and you grab some of that crispy grass. That's like steam spinach, isn't it? It's soggy. That's a non-brittle climate. That trash bag created a non-brittle climate, didn't it? Because it didn't let the moisture escape. There's a bunch of moisture in those fresh grass clippings. It stayed there. It created moist, temperature-stable conditions. That's what microbes love. That's a microbe's dream home. It's got moisture in it. It's got warm, stable temperatures. A little bit of movement in there, maybe. That may make it even better. I guess your trash bag didn't have that, but it had a little movement. It'd be even better. Not too much, just a little bit, gentle stirring. And it needs to have the right mix of carbon and nitrogen, too. Too much carbon, it doesn't feed the microbes. Too much nitrogen is too rich, creates toxicity. So you right balance, burgers and fries. Microbes happy, right? You want too much fries, you want too much burger, you get this right. Makes carbon and nitrogen. This happens. We create microclimates in Central Texas when we make a silage pit. When you cover your silage pit, it's going to get too dry for microbes to process that silage. You do it in a compost pit, right? So, now you can go home and tell everybody, Glendon's miracle cure for Central Texas soil carbon is to mow your pasture, put it in a giant compost pit, let it compost down, and then put it all back on the pasture. like it is. No way. I made compost. That is hard work. There's no way you're going to get ahead with that. Well, the other option, bingo, a ruminant stomach. Is it moist? Yeah. Is it stable temperature? A little bit warm? Oh yeah. You ever cut open a deer this season? You put your hand in that gut cavity? Nice and warm in there. Those microbes are loving it. Heaven forbid you pop that gut pocket. There's going to be some gases coming out of it. That's the fermentation action. That's the microbial action. A ruminant stomach is a home for microbes. It's a dream home for microbes. And it even stirs it just a little bit. Right about that, a little bit of movement stirs it. And then when everything on the outside of that clump of grass or that twig gets eaten, what does it go do? So I'm sitting in the shade in the midday. Somebody says, "Oh, Jill, you're a pretty girl." She goes, start chewing that cud, doesn't she? She burp it up, and she's going to chew it up. And what's that going to do? A whole new set of surfaces that the microbes can now eat from. Right? So it can only eat on the outside of that piece of grass, or branch, or leaf, or whatever it was. Now that the animals chewed it up again, it's got a whole new set of food going in it. Right? So this is why they chew the cud. And it puts it back into its custom non-brittle climate, where microbes are happy and they're going to process that vegetative matter into something else. Okay, go ahead. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Yeah, okay. So back to our question. Is all the carbon that our plants captured going to make it into our soil? Depends on if you got a ruminant. You got a ruminant in the equation, you got a pathway to get plant matter into soil organic carbon. If you don't have a ruminant, it's going in the air, isn't it? Nothing's eating your fence posts. They ain't making soil organic carbon, they're making air. Now, by the way, if you dig up the fence post, look at the bottom of it is a dead continent. That's the bottom of it's a body, a very different way than the top. It's in an already continent. There is one more step we got to talk about. Because a ruminant doesn't swap poop out soil, does it? Goats make these beautiful little spherical pellets, just right for that dung beetle to roll away to his home, right? And by the way, anyone that remembers this from 3D geometry, what shape has the smallest surface area to volume ratio? Circle and sphere. Very good. Exactly. 2 dimensions of a circle, 3 dimensions of a sphere. Yeah. If you want the least air contact, that's the surface area, right? You want the least air contact for that carbon to fly away, for the most volume, the most organic carbon to be stored, it's a gold pellet. How do they know how to do that? I don't know, but it's incredible. Who ever thought you ever admired gold? A spherical pellet, easy to transport for your soil food web, and very low carbon loss to the air. Okay? And so that's what happens. You got a functioning soil food web. It's going to take that manure and it's going to drop it into your root zone as high carbon soil. So carbon doesn't get lost. Okay? It's not flying away in the air. There's a catch. Of course, there's a catch, right? There's got to be a catch if you're going to be turning brush and weeds in the black soil of the barbecue for nothing. Why is it turning the barbecue, by the way? The animal ate that plant matter, and did it just poop all of it out? No, it took a cat, didn't it? It said, I need some of that for my hard work here. And it turned it into more goat. Right? That's why your goats raise it, to grow. Took all that vegetative matter, kept some of it, turned it into barbecue. The rest of it pooped out. As long as you got a soil food web, black soil. All right, we're going to brush and weeds in black soil barbecue. Why brush and weeds? Because it's a goat. That's what it wants to eat. It wants to eat brush and weeds. You put a sheep out there, it wants to eat grass. You got lots of grass, you need to turn that grass over, you need to use it, turn it into barbecue, and back into soil. You better use a sheep to do it. You got a bunch of brush and weeds, put some goats in there. Okay? This is the role of goats in Central Texas ecosystems. We grow a lot of brush here. This is not Britain. Okay? We ain't growing beautiful green grass with no nitrogen, no irrigation, no nothing. Okay? This is Central Texas. We're growing a lot of brush, a lot of thorny stuff, a lot of hardwood stuff. Goat don't care. This is the climate a goat was made for. Right? All right, go ahead there. So the catch is, do you have a functioning soil food? Tell two more stories here. Bear with me. I'm almost done. I'll tell two more stories here. They're kind of the same story. So we were in Holland Cattle for a little bit. Rotation grazed in Holland Cattle on some land and so forth. And one of these pretty Holland cows had a bull calf and it died. I don't know what to do. So we had this bull calf that we were bottle feeding. And we weren't really ready for this. It's our first year in cattle in the first place. And we lived on this little bitty place with a little cabin on it. Anyway, we put a pen in the backyard and we just strawed it down, put that little bull on there, and we bottle fed him every day. And then when it come time to start weaning him, we had to get some feed for him. Go down to the store, it was 35 miles away. We were really rural there. Right? We were just about as far north as you can go and still have people living close to North Alabama. Anyway, drive 35 minutes to the store. The next closest store, like an hour and a half away, okay? As we go to co-op ag, so we went down to co-op ag. What do you got for weaning a calf? Well, we got some feed over there. We got looking at it. Medicated. What's the medicated? Well, it's just got a little bit of antibiotics in it. Just a little bit of keep infection. Well, that makes sense in a shrouded feedlot. That's usually where you're feeding bag feed anyway. They're out on pasture, or we need it. But anyway, that's all they carry. What the heck? Okay, we'll take it. Medicated feed him, get him weaned off, and every now and then, you know, once the hen got a little bit littered, we add that litter straw. Deep litter bag. Soiled out a bit, we add a little more straw. You know, pretty soon you got straw. I don't know like that, you know. But it's interlaced with manure. It's a compost pile now, right? And eventually we moved that bull calf out of there, and I think we sold it. And but now we got this in our backyard. You know, we got this 10 foot by 12 foot or whatever it was, this little bin there of compost. Well, that's fine. I'm gonna rake that up. I'm gonna put a little container around it. It's gonna be a real nice raised bed for us. So I rake all this stuff up meticulously into a compost pile. I'll wait for the microbes to do their magic. By the way, at this point, we had been living in a house. The only toilet was a compost toilet that I built from scratch. I had a crash course, PhD, in composting. I tell you what, you do not want to get that wrong. You better know if it's the only toilet in your house and you're in a climate that has 6 months of frozen winter, you better get it right. So I knew composting. I had to. Okay, I knew composting, and I said, man, it's going to be a wonderful compost. I ended up just right, layers, a little bit of moisture, and a layer, a little bit more moisture covered up. Wait. Nothing. Nothing. It was antibiotic laced. What do you think happened to antibiotics? It went out into the manure. What are antibiotics? They're antimicrobials. And then I was expecting the microbial community to come and process all the manure. What are microbial activity going to be happening when you got antibiotics in the feed? That's what it's for. It's to kill the microbes. So then I make up this beautiful home for the microbes and I fill it with antibiotics. Of course that's going to happen. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. I mean, we had done the same thing many times. Every winter we did a deep litter system and we composted in the spring. I mean, that stuff, if you cover it, you pull the tarp off, it just doesn't knock you out. There's so much steam and heat coming off that thing, and carbon dioxide, real carbon dioxide rich, I'm sure you can suffocate over the thing. You pull that tarp off and take a deep breath, there's no oxygen left in there. It just knock you right out, and nobody finds you either, because the microbes eat you right up with this. Yeah, powerful stuff, right? And yet, we couldn't make it happen. So the other story is related. We got a whole bunch of compost from some friends of ours down about 5 miles from us on the highway, and we brought it back to use in the garden. And it was about 3 to 5 years old. It should be soiled by now, right? Okay, we're unloading it. There's cow turds in here still. We're unloading it. It's going to roll out, roll across that frisbee. And pick that thing up, and you break that up a little bit. It's hard. I mean, it's like you find a fatal it's mummified, man. It's hard. I think it must have
dry on the top, but it's hard. We'll bury it, let it compost down, it'll be fine next year. Next year, right there pulling carrots and prepping the beds, man, they're still in there. What on earth? Why we gotta, I mean, I could pull that cow patty off, you can see the wrinkles from where it landed in the cow patty. There wasn't nothing happening to that food. And they did use antibiotics. Every now and then they would have had a really sick animal. Usually it was off by itself in the stall. They wasn't having antibiotics. They certainly weren't feeding back in. We finally found out they had a terrible parasite infestation on them. And they were pouring the dewormer to all their animals in heavy doses. Parasite resistance is a problem. Okay, if we took a goat into the vet, he'd say give them a double dose of ivermectin. Double dose. Don't wait. You give them double dose now. And, by the way, here's the benzodol. Give them a double dose of that too. We're giving quad doses of dewormer to every animal that had a worm bug. That's a lot of dewormer. Dewormer is a toxin that works particularly well for parasitic microbes. Again, our manure was full of dewormer. Now y'all go tell your neighbors, that Glendon Rhoades said, please stop using dewormer. Glory to God. Go to me. The proof's in the pudding, okay? If you've got manure sitting on your property more than 2 or 3 days, if it's goat pellets, certainly if you got it on your property more than 2 or 3 weeks, something is wrong with the soil food web. Something is not converting that into soil, right? Can I tell you exactly what it is? No, but you go walk your pasture and you can see. If it's not, something's wrong. This manure is going to turn into soil. If it's not, there's something breaking that chain. There's something broken in that chain. Now, did we worm our goats? We wormed our goats very rarely. If we got a new goat and it had been in a small pen for a long time, which means it would poop and the eggs would hatch out, go into the soil, larva stage 1, okay, and then they would get enough nutrient reserves built up in the soil so that they could climb up piece of grass. Okay, they'll be in that bottom 2 inches because they don't have a whole lot of reserves because it's thin, and they don't want to dry out, and it waits to be digested. Sitting there waiting. If it's a small pen, small enough to grow grass but not enough grass, the goats are eating right down to the bottom right. They're eating that fresh soup right next to the ground. It's got that larvae on it. It's got the same larvae that the goat already had in its, the parasites that the goat had in its belly. That larvae, which is called a skin, it bites it, it reinfested, it makes thousands of eggs, they come out the back end, you reingest. It's almost a closed loop. If you wanted to breed parasites, that's the perfect breeding ground for parasites. Put goats in a small enough pen that the grass still grows, but they're always eating down. You'll have picked out parasites. So if we bought a goat from a place like that, it'd come back, it's like 2,000 or 3,000 eggs per gram. Do the fecal sample on it, you take go here, you mix it a certain way, you put it under a microscope slide, look at it, count the eggs on it, do the calculation, get how many eggs per day. That's a veterinary standard for good work. They like to see goats like 200 or 300 eggs per gram is okay. You start getting above that, so we might want to be one. At least for us and the dairy goats, it might be a little bit for meat goats or that. That's kind of where they have to be brought from. We have goats come with 2,000 or 3,000 eggs per gram. Give them a dose, quad dose, ivermectin, benzodol, and then with a rotational grazing, not every 7 days. They were moving, I think the time was 7 to 10 days. So we move them off a paddock, and we know all the manure on that paddock is between 1 and 7 days old, right? If they drop it today, but it's just today's manure. If they drop it the first day, they got it in 7 days old, somewhere in between there, right? Then they're in a new paddock, and they're pooping in there. We go back 3 days later, all the poop is gone, except for one strange poop that was kind of stringy. All that poop is still there. It was from an endo. It'd been dewormed, and soil food web's not processing that. Well, what about our other ones? Why weren't they dewormed? They weren't dewormed because here's what happens when you rotation the graze. The goats poop, manure, the eggs hatch, larvae goes into phase 1 in the ground. It needs like a couple of weeks in the ground before it can come up. It depends on how much rain you have, humidity, climate, things like that. So, a couple of weeks, I think they say usually 14 to 21 days. It's in the ground. 2 weeks later, it pops up. It's climbing up that grass. I'm going to give you a host, right? Crawls up on a juicy piece of grass and waits. Where are your goats? It's 14 days. they're gone. They're in the next paddock, right? This is why we never put them in the same paddock for more than 10 days. So we always want to make sure we broke that one off, right? 10 days later, the goats are moved. Larvae crawls up the grass waiting, hopeful for a host to come along and chomp it. Goats can't get there. It doesn't matter if they want to eat it or not. They can't. It's in another paddock. And then a week later, it's in a different paddock. And a week later, it's in a different paddock. And a week later, it's in a different paddock. Rotational grazing, by the way, good rule of thumb, you need at least 12 to 20 paddocks. That doesn't even have to have permanent fencing, maybe 12 paddocks. We use temporary fencing. We can set that up. A lot of times a pinwheel pattern makes sense, okay? And you've got to be quick to put your fence up, okay? That's a very streamlined process to put the fence up. But you move those goats through 12 paddocks. It's been 12 weeks since they were back on that, and that thing's been sitting up there for 12 weeks waiting. It's dead. It is long dead. That's the most vulnerable part of the life cycle for a parasite. Sitting on that grass, waiting for a host. It can't do a thing but wait. And it's drying out the time. Running out of energy to time. If it doesn't get ingested quickly, it's dead. There's no way our goats can ingest it. They're behind fence somewhere else. And that piece of property hasn't had manure dropped on it for like 80 or 90 days. All the parasites are going to be dead already. By the time we get back around, it's clean pasture. And they go and they go and graze there. And by the way, we're going to get on the graze from the top down, right? And it gets about 6 inches tall. We're going to be setting up the next bunch and moving them out. So even any larvae that somehow came off a deer or something, I don't know how else they're going to. What I'm saying is it's a double whammy. On 2 counts, they're not ingesting the larvae. 1, they're not eating low enough, and 2, the larvae is all dead. You had a quick question there?
Good question. How many days per paddock? How large per paddock?
Save it for the end. That's a big question. Okay. So do you have a functioning soil food web? Questions that might help you answer that is what's your land use history? We had cotton growing on our land. Boll weevil was a terrible plague for cotton farmers. They used some things to handle that boll weevil. There's still residual effects 100 years later to that, okay? And it has a big impact on the soil fungal community. Okay, so we don't have much fungal activity at all in our soil. I'm not talking bad fungus. I'm talking fungus in general. In general, it's good. Okay, most of the activity it does is breaking plant matter out of the soil. Have you had a history of antimicrobials used on your property, antifungals, pesticides? Sometimes you don't mean for them to be that, but they are. Okay, then you might have a soil food web that's not functioning. Doesn't mean you can't raise goats. It means the carbon from those plants is not making it into the do you have good manure? We had bad manure in the case of bull. We had bad manure in the case of the compost we got from the neighbors, and in the case of our heavily dewormed sheep and goats. So the proof was in the pudding. Manure's still there. 6 months, 3 years, 10 years later, some manure lasted like 10 years. Proof's in the pudding. Obviously, the soil food web can't process it. Rotational grazing. Okay. You asked the question about rotational grazing. Rotational grazing, if you really want to know it, if you really want to know all the particulars, you can take a course, a week-long course, Ranching for Profit, 4-day course, Ranching for Profit, $3,000 to $5,000, something like that. It's worth every penny if you've got acreage, because it's very good. It's an art and a science. You can learn and learn and learn about it and never finish it out. So, the reason I say that is, I'm not going to give you the whole crash course on rotational grazing for the last 3 slides of the presentation, but I'm going to tell you about the benefits of it. There's a lot of information out on it. If you just want to get started and get your feet in it, it is not going to take you a week to figure it out, okay? Say that. But the biggest thing with rotational grazing is get good at putting on fences. That means have a system that is streamlined perfectly. You can put that new fence up and there's no time left. You know, come back to the house and say, oh, you that's what you want. You want a fence to go real quick. And then 3 weeks, 6 weeks after using that fencing system, you go through ruthlessly and say, where's my time going? And you streamline the whole thing again. Okay? So that moving fence is as easy as drinking iced tea. That's what you want. What are the benefits of rotational grazing? Decrease selectivity. You've got picky eaters, you've got picky goats. Remember rotational grazing said they start competitive eating. If you've got a whole buffet of food in front of you, you're kind of picky. If somebody brings it out to you in helpings, first course is just this. You eat all of it.
clam and some weird mint sauce. I never would have tried that. All right, it's in front of me, that's all I got, I'll eat it. The next course, something else, you know, that maybe you wouldn't pick from the buffet, but it's in front of you, so now you eat it, right? You've taken your whole pasture, and you said to the goats, here's your plate, that's it. And they pretty well come to plate. In other words, they become less picky, decrease selectivity. Increased grazing motivation. I'll better go ahead and eat it before the next one does. Competitive eating is triggered. You've got a lot of goats on a small area. Yeah, they're going to graze the whole property, but right now they don't have a small area. It triggers a competitive eating. This is what large herds do, by the way. You know, Africa, the wildebeest herds, you got like tens of thousands of animals all in one herd. You better get that grass while it's there. If you don't, you're going to end up at the back of the herd. The herd's going to move on and you're dead. Right? So competitive eating happens. Also, increased trampling of unused forage. You got stuff that the goats, for some reason, are so, they just won't eat it, even when they're not being 50 years, they still won't eat it. You want that down on the ground, so it doesn't get a competitive advantage. Good grass is being eaten and the bad stuff's not. You want it trampled down. The higher your herd density, the more that trampling action happens. The higher the competitive herds, we call it herd effect. When things are in a tight herd, they act differently than when they're loose, continuous grazing on 50 herd. Increased water infiltration. This is because of the hoof action of the animals. It breaks up the clay pan, which we have a lot of clay pan on the top of our soils now. That kind of soil science is a different presentation maybe, but the hoof action breaks that up and lets the water drain into the soil faster. There's a simple test you can do as a producer to see what your rainwater infiltration rates are and track those over time. It just takes a round piece of steel pipe and a hammer, a piece of ceramic. Total rest periods. You never get total rest periods with continuous grazing. A plant gets eaten, it starts regrowing. What's the tastiest part of the plant? It'll regrow, right? So an animal comes along, rebinds that, regrows. That's what I can eat. So you got old, unused grass going up top. It's dried out, no good anymore. And at the bottom, you've got little bitty shoots that are trying to photosynthesize, and something comes on the bottom. With rotational grazing, you get total rest. You let those shoots grow out, put the carbohydrate stores into the roots, and be ready as a mature grazing leaf before it gets rested. Customizable rest periods. We can let the grass fully recover and put the goats back in before the brush fully recovers. The brush takes longer to recover. It's got to put that leaf later on first. The grass is already fully recovered, and the brush hasn't got a leaf out. And we put them back in before the brush is recovered, and every time you do that, the brush loses a little bit of its vitality, loses some root reserves, and eventually you'll see more grass growing and less brush growing. That's if you're targeting regrowth. Reduce the regrowth. If you don't want to reduce the regrowth, you use a longer rest period. Okay? Maybe you got a little bit of pasture as it is. You put a longer rest period, make sure that that regrowth is to recover as well, and then it's not going to get bad and bad with successive grazing. And a clean, regular parasite cycle, I think I already mentioned that, but it is more effective than antibiotics. I think we brought the only fecal sample into North Alfred vet practice that had 0 eggs in the whole slot. They're used to counting dozens. Matter of fact, that lamb that we brought in from we bought, they stopped counting something. So we got about halfway through the slide. There's lots. You need to eat one. It's real hot. I got to count. Then they looked at, I don't think it's the same animal, but it's the animal of the same herder. 2 years later, they couldn't find a single parasite. There's almost always a background egg out of those. None, because rotational grazing gives such a and I think that's not all. I think I've covered everything that I want to cover. There's a couple of shots there. Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, this is actually just showing grasses recover faster than trees. Go ahead. And there's a window there where you can regraze something or shrubs and trees are not fully recovered grasses all over. And there's your recommended works. Okay, let's leave this up. Let me just leave this on afterwards, and anybody that wants to come make a picture of it. I don't know how well it will show up, but you need to be closer to do it. Holistic management, Savory and Butterfield, that's the one that talks about holistic context, quality of life, good decision-making frameworks. Regenerative Agriculture is a book by Richard Perkins. He's out of Sweden, a different climate than us, but he gives a very good breakdown of Savory's holistic context and some examples of it. It's actually, I find it easier to understand than Savory's explanation of it, even though he's the one that came up with it in the first place. Richard Perkins was a very good summary of it. Natural Goat Care by Pat Colby, very focused on minerals and health. This is great. This is a collection of essays. This is one my wife likes. Healthy Land, Happy Families, and Profitable Businesses by David Pratt. This is from the Ranching for Profit organization. They used to be partners with Savory. And he took the more economist route, and Savory took the more ecologist route. But they're both looking at, man, how did Nick put it in the papers? Really good. Conservation through commerce, right? The economics matter, the ecology matters. You've got to find a way where they're both benefiting. The ecology of your land is benefiting, your soil's getting better, your plants are getting better, and your pocketbook's getting better. If you do those simultaneously, you're onto something, right? So he was the economist, and he was the ecologist, and they work together, and they basically present a very similar way of looking at the land. But this one is a series of essays, so it's quite easy to pick up, read one essay, and put it down. Nourishment by Fred Provenza. Really what you need to remember is Fred Provenza. He did some really interesting research on why animals eat the things they eat. Appetite. What is appetite? What does appetite tell you? Why was J.O., our old goat, going nuts for prospecting all weed in the driveway? Somehow there had been a feedback loop established in her body where when she ate that, when she felt the way she did with zinc deficiency, and she ate that herb, it made her feel better. Somehow. Increased metabolism, better digestion, whatever it happens to be, that's not well understood. But what is understood is there is nutritional wisdom in ruminants. If they have experienced the benefits of eating a certain food source, they can select their own diet pretty appropriately. There are times when that's not true. Okay? If it goes through them, like if you buy a load of cattle from the Montana mountains and you bring them to Central Texas, they very well may get into something that they have never been around. They weren't introduced to when they were young. That is very bad for them, and they don't have that nutritional wisdom background built into them. So it's not like a magic thing. It's experiential through their life they pick up. And cowboys talk about cows that know the range. I keep back my own heifers because they know the range. That's what they're talking about. They have exposure to that place. Soil owners manual. So anyway, yeah, his works are very good. If you can read some of his papers or interviews, they're excellent. The book is okay. It's a little more philosophical, I would say. But his papers are really interesting for this whole topic. Soil owner's manual. And if you bought soil, it didn't come with an owner's manual. John Stevens set out to write one. He talks a lot about decomposition, things that matter for decomposition, especially in a farming context, but it matters for pastures as well. Carbon nitrogen ratios. Basically, it's composting applied to pastures. Also, St. North by Joe Stelton. Anything by Joe Stelton. Very interesting stuff. He's been in rotational grazing for a long time. And human or animal. Compost control is, hey, if you want to get ahead on next month's presentation, read Human or Animal by Joe Jenkins. It's composting to do your dirty work. And, that didn't come out quite right. Let's get my phone number and email address. You're welcome to contact me, or I have some stuff at roseregeneration.com. I'm going to try to get the slideshow up on that. And I'm going to try to get the video worked today. I'll try to put the whole video of this presentation. Not that every single thing I said is just the wrong way to say it, but hopefully it'll be That's all I got for you. Oh, yes. Did y'all see what that picture was of? Isn't that a most precious thing? That's our orphanage. And that's, I think they died in the orphanage, certainly an orphanage mother, or orphanage worker. And she's holding a baby. See, the legs are straight out on the floor. That's her feet right there. She's sitting straight out on the floor right next to the sofa, and she's holding a baby underneath the mama goat. And that baby is suckling the mama goat. This is before infant meal was on Walmart shelves. All right? Where's your milk replacer? It's in something that's uncannily similar to humans. A goat and a sheep, uncannily similar to humans. I know we don't eat brush and weeds, but there is an incredible synergy between humans and small ruminants, even cattle, but especially small ruminants. I worked in the hospital while we were getting into sheep and goats, and somebody gave me an old hospital beta scale, the old balance beam ones, and of course it's made for human babies, 0 to 12 pounds or something like that, that's where just about all the human babies fall into. Guess what all the goats weigh? 0 to 12 pounds. They're just about the exact same size as a human baby. And we weigh our babies on that thing, our goat babies on that thing, they just about be the middle of the scale of it. It's like human babies. What are they drinking off of? They're sucking off a goat udder that works just fine for humans. Goat milk is considered the premier milk supplement for humans. And actually, I've seen pictures of mother goats that had adopted horses, I think even giraffes. Can you imagine a giraffe that's down there? Had to put them on the stand for the giraffe to eat it. But, and I don't know if y'all can see the look on that mama goat's face, but I recognize that look. So I'm meeting mama. See her eyes are just a little bit closed there. See her teeth sticking out, see a little gap. Oh, she's happy. She'll be chewing her cud. Okay, you had a question about rotational grazing. And it was how many animals in what size area, right? How often are you moving them? How many paddocks do you have? How do you get water to them all? How do you get power to them all? How do you get my electric fence system to work? It's the whole system, okay? And you have to pick a starting point and then adjust. One of the best things you can do is learn to estimate standing forage. I'm going to put a pin up. How many days worth of grazing is it? You're going to get it wrong the first time. Of course, you're going to get it wrong the first time. Oh, wouldn't you? Okay? But guess what? You come back every day and you look. You say, man, I thought that paddock was going to last 5 days. I think they need it all in 3. And if you're really ahead of yourself, you're really on top of your game, you'll have to put the first paddock up and the second one at the same time. And you come back 3 days and say, oh man, it's already time to move. Open the fence up, let them tune to the new paddock, close the fence back up. That's all you had to do, right? That's your adjustment. And when you put your third paddock up, you better be ready. Because what you thought was 5 days, the grazing was only 3. So you make that paddock a little bit bigger. Okay, and you adjust your paddock sizes like this. And you get pretty good at learning how much grazing is there. And then guess what happens? Summer heat hits and your grass goes into dormancy, you change. Okay? It's a learning game. It's a very satisfying game, and every time you do that, you're putting boots on the ground, Mark. The old timers all said the best treatment for your land is the blueprints of the farmer. You're walking your land, you're aware of what's happening there. Think about how high maintenance those humans are. I need a breakfast in the morning and a coffee brought in from Colombia, picked on berry bushes and shelled out and roasted and ground and sent all the way here and percolated through my favorite coffee maker. And then 4 hours later, oh, I'm looking for some lunch. Well, here's some spinach. No, that ain't good enough. I need some spinach and some tomatoes and some balsamic vinegar on it and a beef patty and a bun made from a wheat field somewhere, some chicken eggs in it and whatever else it takes to make. And then 6 hours later, I'm going to order it all again. I'm pretty high maintenance. We humans are very high maintenance. Meanwhile, goats out there eating brush for the 200th day in a row. He didn't eat coffee in the morning. He didn't eat 8 different food groups in a day. We're high maintenance critters. What justifies our existence in an ecological landscape? What justifies us being at the top and consuming all these nutrients? Is it because we can pull a plow better than an ox? No. Is it because we can eat dirt? No. Is it because we can lay out in the sun and make energy for everyone else? No. It's our brain. We're supposed to be making management decisions. That's our role in ecology. Okay, those of you that are familiar with Genesis, what's the job of the man? I'm going to put mankind in charge. He's going to manage my creation. Manage. You're not going to pull the plow as good as an ox. He's not going to eat tree leaves as good as a giraffe. He's not going to dig through the soil as good as an earthworm. He's definitely not going to be able to turn sunlight into sugar like every plant that does. But he's got a brain. He's going to manage. That's our job. That's what justifies how high maintenance we figure are. So our job is to be out on the landscape looking and making adjustments to how the system is managed. More questions, or what do you think? You got any questions? Questions? Yeah.
2 questions that may be interrelated.
Sure.
Is there a minimum size that is too small, like you should have?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this.
And then 2, survivability against predators. I don't know if those are related.
Okay. I'll start with the second. Survivability against predators. We use the cheat code. We use the electric netting. You know what electric netting is? It's so small at the bottom because we're using poultry electric netting. It's so small that you put baby chicks in there and they can't get out. The gaps are real supposed to go to the bottom. But it's slow to put out, especially put a lot of it out. It takes a lot of energy to keep it energized because so much of it is close to the ground. It's always ground out. So for very small packs, I would recommend electric netting with the caveat that it keeps everything out. I mean, we had toads getting stuck up and stuff. stuff design. I mean, it is like, it's a very, very effective barrier. So, you know, like nuclear bombs, you know, very effective, but you be careful where you use them. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. If you have a, I don't know, let's say you had a deer feeder, okay? You've got electric netting right up next to it. You very well may stop seeing deer come through it, right? You got, I don't know, you got a bunch of armadillos that you like, I don't know, horny toads, something like that, okay? And they're going to have a hard time crossing that barrier. Now, another thing I should have mentioned up here, it's not up here, Noble Research Institute. Noble Research Institute. They're 4 hours north of here. Don't be mad, they're from Oklahoma, okay? They are a research institute that came out of essentially a desire to stop the Dust Bowl from happening. Recently, they went through this like burning down and rebuilding transformation. They are all regenerative ag now. That's all they do, regenerative ag, research, consulting, coursework. 4.5 hours north of here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. They got ranches all over the place in that area. They got some right on the Red River. They put out some excellent stuff. They're on YouTube now. They got a full-time videographer and video editor. Okay, so they're putting stuff out on YouTube. If you search for Global Research Institute, one of the reasons that I brought that up is because they are now running goat herds, rotational grazing behind 3 strands of electric. Okay, so fence posts, every 10 or 12 steps, 3 strands of electric polywire. Maybe use tape at the top one to make it more visible, whatever you would do there. But they are successfully keeping their herd behind 3 strands of polywire. Predators can get through that to some degree. If you got it right and a dog gets a zap on the nose, any canine species, coyote, gets a zap on the nose, you don't want to come back for more. I know because our neighbor who we released our farm off of had like 7 German shepherds who were basically free range on the property, and we were raising chickens from day old up to butchering or laying, and goats and goat kids out there, and you bet they would have been into them, but every one of them got a zap on the nose first thing, and they said, "Wow." Now that's true if you got a good grounding in your electric fencing setup and a powerful enough energizer. Energizers, fence energizers. Don't pay attention to, oh, it does 30 miles of fencing. Some marketer that's never put out 1 foot of electric fence wrote that. He don't know. He's got no clue if it'll work for 30 miles. It won't even work for 3. Don't pay attention to that. It's marketing junk. Look at the joules. Look at the joules and get you a good chart that shows joule ratings. It'll be half a joule if it's a little energizer. We're using 2 joules or 3 joules, 2.0 to 3.0 joule energizers in our fences. Okay? They were sufficient for like 5 electric nets if you don't have too much woody vegetation touching the net. If you're in brushy country, it's going to take longer more than that. Okay, but look at the joule rating. It'll say 0.5 J, capital J. That's how much energy it's actually pumping out. Yes, ma'am?
You kind of addressed something what I'm thinking about with the jewels, which is dead on that. But do you think that there's room in this culture, culture for geofencing?
Geofencing. I'm excited about geofencing, cautiously. I don't know where it's going to go. I think it's fairly expensive right now.
It is.
Geofencing is really neat, guys, especially for rotational grazing. You put a GPS collar on each of your animals, it tracks where they're at, and it puts a virtual fence up. You'll see these for dogs. You put a virtual fence up, and then their collar will tell them when they're getting close to it, and they learn that that's the boundary, and they just stay in it. There's nothing physical there. Well, maybe there's a wire around the dogs. But in this case, we're talking about GPS coordinates logged into their collar that tell them where the boundary is. Okay? And you can pull up your phone or on your computer at home, and you can retrace that boundary. So you're putting a paddock up instead of all the sweater walking. You put the paddock up by doing this. Now I like walking the land, and I know this is the reason why. Don't stop walking the land if your GPS collars. You'll still have to walk anyway. Things are always going to work. But anyway, that's what it allows you to do. I was very interested in it because we were looking at grazing riparian areas like creek beds or riverbanks in Saskatchewan. There's a real need for that because plants get so old and nothing is processing that old growth that new growth can't find its way through being choked out, right? And so the banks become unstable, and this is a problem in Saskatchewan. I'm sure it's a problem here too. And goats do a really good job regenerating that growth. And you can't really put an electric fence down to the river. Through all that junk and trash, man, you could be all day putting one fence up, cutting routes through there. And so geofencing sounded very good to me. But there's zero predator control in, right? Predator ain't got no GPS collar on. They come in and do this picture. So most guys see it with cattle or in places like New Zealand where they have no predators. But the answer here, I think, would be really good guardian animals. Livestock guardian dogs. Livestock guardian dogs is a whole other art and science. I don't claim to know it very well. We have looked into it a little bit. We used one, but we used one right at home. We had neighbors that used it very effectively against coyotes. By the way, in Saskatchewan, it's not uncommon to hear someone had shot 2 dozen coyotes in one winter out their bathroom window. Our neighbor did several winters. 2 dozen coyotes out the bathroom window in one. So they were everywhere, right? And we did have neighbors that ran a commercial sheep operation, sheep, no less, right? They were looking for a chance to die. Not Norfolk sheep either, the ones that want to die. And they were able to effectively keep coyotes off it with teams of 2 dogs with each herd, minimum partners of 2 dogs. They were fully bonded to the flock. They come from about me to you. If I went out to give them their food, they're staying from that far away from me. Just I mean, like, you can get out of here. This is my herd, and that's the sort of dog training that we needed in that context. So yeah, I think it's worth looking at, but I haven't really done that. Now,
Can you talk about the potential for living fences or hedgerows?
oh man, this is getting good. Okay, I'm just gonna push here, get us back. Actually, no, just go all the way back to the first slide. First slide had all those photos on it. So Caragana, hedgerow, or that pea bush, that's what we ran goats on. I think it definitely has potential as a living fence. You know what a living fence is? Yeah, in Britain, so this is close to being a living fence. When you have a stand of woody growth that's so dense that animals can't get through it, we call that a living fence. It's alive, but it's functioning like a fence, right? You generally have to weed or prune these species at least the first 5 years to create a strong enough fence. But, so again, where my wife is from, these are fairly common. They're called hedgerows, but often they were functional as fences. And when the plant is growing up, you've got to, generally, depending on the species, you've got to lay it down because that bottom 12 inches is the hard part to get soft. Okay, so you lay down a plant, so that means you have to have a species that's tolerant of that. You cut like half or 2/3 of the way through the plant, maybe even 3/4 of the way through the plant, you lay it down. Then it grows horizontally, but all the shoots come off the top again, so it grows almost like a net bar fence, right? And you braid that in into the next several plants. You can be the tight spacing about 12 inches of plants. There are species that would probably work over here. Did you recommend a few species, Calvin? Does Weestax work for that? Could it?
Agarita.
Agarita, I've heard Agarita mentioned in this context. Is thorny, that helps, because it deters, it's like barbed wire fencing, right? It deters the animals from pushing into it. Bodart was used. Osage orange, the force out the trees, that was used in this area very early on for living fences. Okay, so it's possible. You've got to establish a tree line, and you've got to maintain that for a few years. I think the first year's quite a bit of work. 6 to 7 years aren't that bad. Why would you do that, though? Net wire's cheap. There's a few reasons you might want to do that. You might want to establish brushy growth in all your paddocks anyway. If you're going to be planting, willow for your goats anyway, maybe you should just plant it where it can be used as a living fence. If you have agarita, and you're going to use that agarita to protect tree seedlings from being grazed too quickly, that's called a nursery scenario in ecology. Tree nursery, basically, the deer is not going to come along and munch that burrow seedling off very readily because it's surrounded by agarita. If you're doing that anyway, maybe you plant your agarita in a line and weave it together so that it's a living fence. Okay, so there needs to be synergy, essentially what I'm saying. If there is some other reason to have woody growth, in this case, they needed this for shelter belts to stop soil erosion around the fields and also to catch winter snow Snow is a big part of their moisture throughout the year, and so you have a big, long snow drift over a proper windbreak or downwind of a proper windbreak, and all that was moisture for your field. So, and also these are legumes. So they pull nitrogen down out of the air, and it goes out into the field. Research down at 60 feet out into the field, the crop is thriving off of nitrogen put in by that. So big benefit there to having rows of these pea bushes on your field. And now, if they're going to be there anyway, maybe it's worth it to go for the extra row of nitrogen. Then I would say you need to be somewhat cautious about how cross fencing works there. I could see us using this on our property because we have a long, narrow property, and to fence that in paddocks all the way around, we need to strip up the middle that's permanently electrified, and then we can run all of our legs off of it to make paddocks all the way around. I think that's a racetrack almost, going around this oval, around that central. So I could see that being living fence, and then you need to figure out how your legs going to integrate with that without rounding out. So you might just have a little section of wood fence there that you're let the fencing come all the way next to, something like that. But yeah, I think there's opportunity for it. There needs to be other benefits, than just replacing net wire. I don't think it should ever justify itself there. But if there are stacked benefits, then maybe I should stop there. Yes, we'll go back to that last slide. I'm sorry. Where you go to the presentation. Whisper.
Also, you're going to do a deep dive on composting.
Yes, September, and it is in the newspaper article, it says good job right now. There'll be a presentation in September on composting. Like I said, we lived on composting for several years in a very extreme climate, like training kids on there. And so we really learned to play when we were composting, and we have to share some the next month. And there are certain scenarios where composting really makes sense in Texas. For us, it's up at our pool in the pasture. We're not up there a whole lot, and it doesn't make sense to put in a whole septic system just so people can hop out of the swimming pool and use the toilet. There's other places like studio or cabins near lake lots that can get septic lines approved. Anyway, there's certainly a place for them, even in the modern world. Not too much out on the frontier here, but there's certain places for those. And they can be quite simple systems, a lot simpler in this climate would be in Saskatchewan. But yeah, so I'll be presenting on that in about a month. Grab a date.
On the 12th.
Same time. Same time, same place, on the 12th of September. Okay, thank you all.